Welcome to Ideagen TV. Today we are ecstatic to have with us Anita Whitehead, Principal at KPMG. Anita, welcome.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, everyone. Joining me today is Sarah Kambou, the President of the International Center for Research on Women. Our discussion today is taking place in the lead up to the International Day of the Girl and Child on October 11th. A day focused on bringing attention to the rights of girls around the world and the unique challenges that come with these rights. It's also a day where we push further at the call the world to action to accelerate progress towards girls' empowerment, a key component of SDG 5, but also a crucial part of achieving the SDGs as a whole. While we see remarkable examples of girls breaking barriers more and more, the inequity girls face in areas like access to education, nutrition, legal rights, medical care, and more remains staggering. 130 million girls are out of school and 500 million women can't read. 33 million girls become child brides every day. And in 2018, girls accounted for 74% of new HIV infections among adolescents ages 10 to 19. A critical element to successfully addressing these inequities is data. If we can't track them, how will we make progress? This issue is near and dear to us at KPMG. Data and analytics underpin much of the work that we do with our clients. It's also a critical component of the support we provide to our communities. We are a founding partner of Equal Measures 2030 and a partner of Girls Who Code. But of course, we cannot talk about data supporting girls' equity and women's empowerment without mentioning the International Center for Research on Women, ICRW, a leader in the field of research and evidence-based policy. So first of all, Sarah, I want to congratulate ICRW on the recent launch of a research report on women in manufacturing in Kenya. I hear that it's the first research conducted on this topic. And your Africa office has highlighted both some of the barriers facing women in the sector and some recommendations for the industry. One of those recommendations actually focused on the education of girls, particularly in STEM education, to prepare a future from manufacturing where women play more prominent roles. ICRW has a long history of work in education, addressing both barriers, quality education, and the positive advancements towards more equitable standards. Could you talk a bit more about your work?
Good afternoon. Good to see you. And first of all, thank you to you and KPMG for inviting me to come and speak about ICRW's work, particularly around girls' education. And wonderful to be on the Ideagen TV platform. I would really love to sort of start with this Women in Manufacturing report that you teed up here in, helping understand why is education so important to future economic growth in Kenya and in countries around the world. And if we could think of the manufacturing sector as existing within the livelihoods ecosystem, right? What the Kenya Association of Manufacturers was interested in understanding is what has been Kenyan women's experience entering and thriving within that sector. Whether she comes in as an entrepreneur or a business owner, whether she's working in a factory, in production, operations, or management, whether she is an investor in the sector. There are so many possible domains for women's engagement. What has that experience been? And what would the Kenyan government need to do in order to broaden those opportunities for women, really to create more equal access, because that will be a component of growth for the Kenyan economy. As I think about our topic for today, and I'm thinking about livelihoods and the readiness, the preparedness that adolescent girls and young women need in order to enter those domains and thrive within those domains. I'd like to say how the livelihoods ecosystem intersects critically with the education ecosystem. So as you teed up our conversation that 130 million girls are out of school, this is critical in terms of what their lifetime trajectory would be as they seek to have, decent work, earning income, caring for families, being able to invest in their own development. So I was thinking that this sounds very esoteric. This is all very conceptual. Could I bring it down to an example? And I thought, let's go right back into the manufacturing sector. And let's look at the Keep Kenya Moving initiative that the government of Kenya launched as a response to the economic disruption that they've experienced in Kenya due to the COVID pandemic. And then within the manufacturing sector, let's go right into apparel industry and think about the factory where Kenyan women may be working on the floor as part of, the apparel industry, the production. And as she's coming in to that formal sector of employment, everything about her preparedness to date. How far did she get in school? What were the competencies that she learned? How comfortable is she with herself, her self-esteem? How well does she communicate? That pretty much determines how she'll enter and what her trajectory will be. So in a very, very precise, specific way. Usually women with sort of lower educational attainment will come in and they'll start as sweepers, cleaners, floor runners. With a little bit more education, maybe, some primary school, they have hope of getting on the sewing line. They'll start at the back of the sewing line, and that's just doing the stay stitching around, the sleeve piece of a t-shirt, for example. With time, performance, she moves up through the line, and maybe after 8-10 years, she's at the top of the line, which means, yes, she's putting the garment together, but she's also supervising the line. So over the course of that time, she has some incremental advancement in terms of responsibility and pay. But if we're looking at that same factory floor, and you look at the higher skilled, higher paying jobs, which means running equipment, for cutting, for washing, for pressing, for packing. A lot of that equipment has electronic or digital components, and those jobs, more or less, are the reserve of men who've had more access to education, as part of their lifetime experience in their society. So this gives us such a very clear understanding of why education is so important for girls in terms of their lifetime advantages. And we mentioned STEM because certainly STEM is important today. And this concrete example of if you want to go from the sewing line to that next higher level of responsibility and income, you need to have even the basic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic, because even inventory control is all digitally organized. Right. You need to be able to have that to move forward. So up to COVID, I guess we have a pre-COVID and a post-COVID world now, right? With the Millennium Development Goals, with the Sustainable Development Goals, we had made so much progress in terms of girls' education. We had parity at the primary school level. We were seeing more and more girls advancing into secondary level. And then, of course, in some countries, even getting into tertiary level education. But there's still so many barriers to girls entering education, staying in school, having a good education, that we need to think about how do we undo those barriers for them. There's two aspects to that: physical distance. So how far away is the school? Is there transport available? Is that transport safe? If she needs to board at, say, secondary school because it's so far away from her family home, is that boarding facility secure? These are elements of girls' access to education. And then there's the social value that families and girls themselves and society at large place on education. What is her role in the household? If it's a low-income family, they're going to be looking to her to take on responsibilities in food production, in childcare, in taking care of the elderly, income generation. These are time constraints that are important to household well-being, but mean that her labor within the household may very well outweigh parents' conception of the value of education for their daughter. So this is, sort of just a nice overview of why today's conversation about girls' education is so important. And as we, head towards October 11th and the International Day of the Girl Child, why it's important to understand what happens to those 130 million girls who are out of school, and what can we do to change that situation for them moving forward.
So it's a perfect tee up to my next question. You've talked a lot about the challenges and some of the opportunities and the need to think about those issues and solutions in a more holistic way. But what are some of the ways that we can help change the context for adolescent girls and expand opportunities?
The first thing is really to understand their lives, and I think that that's where an organization like ICRW with its research and the fact that we take, we call it an intersectional approach, which is wonky tonk for really just trying to understand all the dimensions of people's lives, right? Their identities, and how they experience their lives in real time. What are the obstacles that they're trying to navigate every day? If it has to do with gender, if it has to do with race or ethnicity, if it has to do with location, are they living in rural areas? Are they living in low-income urban communities? What is it about their existence that we need to understand in order to create a more welcoming, enabling environment for them to succeed? And so oftentimes we speak about creating safe spaces for adolescent girls where they can actually have time with themselves. There may not be adults around. It may be older adolescents, young women who really understand what these girls are going through, what their problems are, what the pathways or solutions forward may be, and allowing them really that time to talk through their issues and figure out what other girls are doing to solve those same problems. And then there's another approach which we find very, very powerful, very impactful, and we call it positive youth development. This is an approach that has received a lot of investment in terms of, I would say, formative research, foundational research into understanding how can we work productively and effectively with adolescents and with youth, larger age groups, so that really we're creating that runway for success. And how can this approach focus on youth, not as a problem, but as an asset, right? As a participant in solving problems, and not just on their own, but with parents, community leaders, government authorities. It's creating this dialogue of what is the issue we're trying to solve? What can everyone contribute in terms of their ideas about what could possibly work moving forward? How do they design that together? How do they execute that together? How do they measure the impact of that together, right? But in its essence, this is youth-centered. That's kind of like the essential foundation. But in its best performance, it's youth-driven, youth-led, that youth who know their situation best are helping us as adults understand what they need to thrive and succeed.
Can you give me a specific example of where an approach like yours has seen some success?
Yes, I mean, let me start with one, and if we have time, I can give you another.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so the first is the Gender Equity Movement in Schools program that ICRW has started back in 2008. So we've been running this program for 12 years. It has been centered in India, working with middle school students. Think of them as, you know, boys and girls aged 12 to 14 years, and really working within the public education sector, and trying to understand what is it that we could inject into the normal, regular public school curriculum that would help young people really question what their experience or what they're learning about who they are. What does it mean to be a boy? What does it mean to be a man? You're a girl. What is your role within the family? What does it mean for your aspirations for your future? So really being able to question the social norms that they live with every day and that actually shape the way they will be as adults. And this is really particularly important because, of course, if we want economic growth, we need to harness all of the assets that are available to us within our communities, and everyone needs to have that preparedness, that readiness, and this amazing opportunity, right, of being able to have equal access to being an entrepreneur or working or pursuing education. This is what is going to drive economic growth forward. So this program is really, again, research-based programming. We as ICRW work with the Ministry of Education, we work with the public schools, we work with teachers, and we're developing curricula that lead students through kind of a critical reflection. So it's very adolescent focused. And there's various dimensions of the program. There's in-class training with teachers who've been trained, of course, in our GEMS curriculum. But then there's a lot of after-school activities where the students are encouraged to pick up any of the themes, activities, discussions that they've been having in class around gender and being able to do some kind of extracurricular activity, a campaign, reaching out to other students, reaching out to parents, whatever inspires them, whatever their imagination, you know, sort of ignites. Mm-hmm. And that's where we find is that given those basic elements of new understanding around gender and how gender can hold us back, how there's so many inequalities in society that really hinder each person becoming their full self and contributing, you know, to society and economic growth. That this is you know, such a powerful thing to watch them run with it, right? Just taking
right.
We're following, you know, as adults, we're all following after them, right? But what we do is we know that of the 2.5 million students that we have, you know, trained, the teachers, 25,000 teachers that we've trained, this has made measurable impact in their lives. And so when you have that kind of a proof base, you can take models like this and then you can scale it, you know, across other school systems. So we're doing that not only in Bangladesh and Vietnam and the Philippines, we're doing it right here in Washington, D.C. with Anacostia High School. So these really unique programs of helping people think through those critical thinking skills, reimagining, you know, who they could be, is just such a wonderful way of helping them overcoming the obstacles that they are just navigating every day of their lives.
So, such impactful work. You know, you mentioned resilience, and with the long-lasting COVID-19 pandemic and economic fallout, racial injustice in the U.S., climate change, I mean, the list is endless. cultivating resilience is really going to be important for us all, especially these young women and girls who are already so greatly impacted by systemic inequities. So in terms of the way the world has been changing, do you have any final thoughts to share on what the trajectory looks like for these adolescent girls around the world?
You had listed, Anita, some really great statistics at the top of our discussion. 130 million girls, out of school. That was before COVID. That was before, the inequalities exist in all of our societies were so starkly exposed. And I and folks at ICRW, people in our field, I know you and your team at KPMG, we're all concerned. And what has been the impact, the social and the economic disruption of COVID? What has been that impact on adolescent girls and their families? And while we're still all working remotely, we're already beginning to build out that, sort of rapid assessment agenda. As soon as we can work in communities, we really need to assess those girls who have been supposedly, virtual schooling, right? Learning remotely. How many of them actually had access to that technology? How many of them were actually able to follow the curriculum? As schools go back to some kind of hybrid model of in the classroom, remote learning, how many of those girls will actually return to school? Will there be a resurgence of other practices that have sought to control girls in the past? Child marriage, right? It's viewed often as protective, but in fact, it diverts, it derails, girls' trajectory to a meaningful, productive, healthy, happy adulthood. So these are the first dimensions I think that we really need to understand, get our minds around. What is it that we'll need to do in the immediate term to ensure that the progress we had made right up to that COVID event, we understand how far it's pulled back. Melinda Gates said just a couple of weeks ago, in 25 weeks, 25 years of social progress on the global development goals has been rolled back. So what does that mean for the girls in Kenya? What does that mean for girls in India? What does that mean for girls in, Anacostia, here in Washington, D.C.? And what do we need to do to ensure that as we launch those programs, we're building equity in, we're addressing, these multiple dimensions of discrimination, prejudice, bias into the new programs moving forward. So we catch up and we move forward bigger and better so that we're doing right by everyone, but especially those who've probably been disproportionately impacted by this lockdown, adolescent girls, that we keep them front and center in our minds as we do this work moving forward.
Thank you, Sarah. So as we close, we would be remiss if we didn't recognize the recent passing of Justice Ginsburg, who has done so much for women and girls. One of my favorite quotes is, "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join." And I caught this on ICRW's tribute page to Justice Ginsburg. Such an amazing woman. So RBG has, I know, a very special place in your heart because she was the 2016 Champion for Change. And I'd love for you to share any personal reflections about her as well.
That's very generous. Thank you. Wow. It's been a hard week for all of us. And I thank you, Anita, for referencing, our honor in honoring her legacy as a Champion for Change awardee for Vision. And so, March 10, 2016, we had this amazing opportunity to be with her, right? To be in her presence. We were hosted by the Danish Embassy. And, we had like 150 people crammed into like this amazing space. It was gorgeous. but there she was, right? A smidge over 5 feet, larger than life, kindness and generosity and grace personified. It was just amazing, frankly, to be in her presence. She's got a great sense of humor. So we listed, all of her wonderful contributions, the lioness of litigation, all of the great decisions, that she had made, to protect not only women's rights, but immigrant rights and civil liberties, right? And I wasn't sure if I should do this, because it was such an event. But, her moniker, Notorious RBG, which I understand she embraces, which is fantastic. But, I just took a moment in sort of making the presentation and talked about Notorious RBG and all the coloring books, that now are available, and just said that it's because of Justice Ginsburg that women have been allowed to color outside the lines, right? That we've been able to imagine new things for ourselves, and that was a debt, that we just with sincerity and depth of gratitude, wanted to make to her. And she laughed. Oh, thank God, right? Thank God. But, thank you for mentioning the tribute page. There was an amazing story on there that I think just links to everything we're talking about right now, and especially as we're running up to International Day of the Girl Child. Just a little while ago, Justice Ginsburg surprised one of her friends' little girl at the little girl's Halloween party. And he dressed up as Justice Ginsburg. You can just imagine the glasses and, the wonderful, cuff and the black and all of that. And she had all of her friends over for a party. And Justice Ginsburg walks through the door.
Wow.
And can you imagine, the energy, the excitement, and just that moment, that sublime moment where a woman so great understands the importance of connecting with adolescent girls. Mm-hmm. And she didn't spend tons of time, but my goodness, for me, it was just emblematic. It was iconic. And that's why, we honor her this week. We honor her on tomorrow at her funeral. And we celebrate her legacy, and we pick up the torch.
Exactly.
Pick up the torch.
I get chills whenever you talk about this story. Thank you so much, Sarah, for spending this time with me and Ideagen TV. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of the 17 days of the SDGs. And George, thank you as always. We wish you all the best.